There were 5 people that were irreplaceable if that kind of game is what you're trying to do. They even thought like, we can just take the old version of this engine and slap in a lion and you have Lion King. Didn't work.
Hey there guys, welcome to the first episode of Slopes Interviews, names pending. We're still waiting on someone to come up with a better name than Slopes Interview. I think we can get a little bit more creative than that. And for this first episode, we have the legendary Doug TenNapel. Thank you very much. Doug TenNapel? TenNapel?
TenNapel.
TenNapel. Right. We'll go with TenNapel.
Daniel, you got it.
Excellent, excellent. So for people out there that don't know who you are, answer the question. Who are you? Tell us about some of the projects you've worked on in the past. Sure,
I created Earthworm Jim. I was the art lead on Jurassic Park Genesis. I created the Neverhood, which was the PC game, and then later Skull Monkeys for PlayStation. I worked on Armacrog, but I've also worked on really obscure projects like the Genesis version of Shadowrun. Ren and Stimpy's Invention, Ren and Stimpy. I was the animation lead on that. I did a little bit of work on the Super Nintendo Disney's Jungle Book.
Okay.
So that's my video games. I've also done 20 graphic novels.
Wow.
I've sold the film rights to about 6 of them into Hollywood. I've gotten an Eisner Award. We've gotten Game of the Year with Earthworm Jim. I'm an Emmy-nominated animator for my work as a show lead on the Netflix version of VeggieTales, which was a pretty recent project. And now I crowdfund. I held the record for the Earthworm Jim comic book. We held the record at $815,000 we raised on Indiegogo before it recently got demised. But I created a character called Bigfoot Bill. And then I just became a professional YouTuber in December when I opened up my political channel. I just buried the needle, pro-Trump, pro-Christian politics, went from 14,000 subscribers to 450,000 subscribers in 3 months.
Oh, wow. Okay. Awesome. So you mentioned quite a lot there that I was actually going to be bringing up because I mean,
that's my whole career.
Yeah, you've nailed it there from beginning to end. I think that's the interview over.
Bye-bye.
So going back to the beginning, as I say in my videos, let's go back to those early days of animation. Was video games the path you ever expected to be going down in the early days?
I never expected it, but I always loved it. So, I was probably 15 in 8th grade or 9th grade when I got my first Atari 2600, that had just the bang, 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 the one stick. And it was my life. I submerged because I was there right when the coin-op arcade explosion happened. When I was in 8th grade, my friends started talking about a little yellow mouth pie thing that ate dots.
Yeah, Pac-Man.
Yep, there you go. And I went to the arcade. I would ride my bike to the next town in Turlock to the arcade with my 2 quarters that I earned from mowing my neighbor's lawn and put them in the Pac-Man machine. And I learned how I just nailed the game after playing it every weekend forever. I think my high score was it was 350,000 on that. I did about the same for Miss Pac-Man by the time it came out after college, but Space Invaders. And then my junior year, I worked in the berry fields. I'm from a farm community. It's all manual labor stuff, but I worked in the berry fields all summer to come home, and I bought a Atari 5200.
Right.
It's the second console. And I just played games all day, all night. So I never dreamed I'd be able to make them, but I drew them on paper. I did all of my design on paper, which also goes into my fandom of I played a lot of D&D, which is,
sure,
if you think about it, the dungeon master takes on all of the roles of the NPCs. It's like a world. You make the world, but you're using people's imagination. It's not that different from Call of Duty. And your character's one person. They're a first person going into your world. When I first saw Castle Wolfenstein, I just went, holy cow, this is or Ultima Underworld. Like, wow, this is like D&D. So I've always played games, never thought I'd have a job of it, was out of a job in 1991. I was animating on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. and that whole project was over. And I was launched in San Diego, and I was going to be an illustrator. And a guy asked if I could animate, and I go, I can animate faster and better than anyone you know. And at the time, I wasn't a great animator, but I was known for my speed. I was just top speed animator. And they said they were working on a cartridge they thought would take a couple of months, and I did all of the assets for the entire. I think it was called Skull Pepper or
Skull Jagger.
Skull Jagger. I did almost all of the assets of that game in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Excellent. I was actually looking that up just before I went in there. And as you stated before, you did the Ren and Stimpy, Stimpy's Invention game as well. A game I rented quite a few times back in the day. Big fan of Ren and Stimpy.
Programming was pretty iffy on it. I mean, the actual flow of the game. And that was before I met the shiny guys, because that's when I learned what a game should be.
Yeah, of course. Those guys. Yeah, Ren and Stimpy was definitely one I picked up because it was Ren and Stimpy. The gameplay itself wasn't the greatest, if I'm honest. But yeah.
Well, I didn't design the gameplay. I just did the animation. It was, of course. If I was designing that thing, I'd kick it in the ass.
So you did the animation for the Super Nintendo version of Jungle Book, but not the Genesis or Mega Drive version?
That's right. So I was the game lead on the Jungle Book for a couple of months. This is a very weird transition. It's spelled out in that book that you have there, The Making of Earthworm Jim. I was a hotshot coming off of Jurassic Park. Virgin hired me in to take over the lead on Jungle Book because Ed Schofield, Mike Dietz were moving on to another project. I think they were basically like halfway through Jungle Book when they had to suddenly jump onto Aladdin to finish it.
Sure, yeah.
The Genesis Aladdin, they drained all the talent out of the company. They started to cover these other projects, so they brought in people from outside companies to fill in, and I was thrown on a Jungle Book, and the team just wanted nothing to do with me. But so I didn't actually do. I think I might have done one Mowgli idle on that game as far as animation goes. I was like a manager. I walked on that project and I'm like, ugh. I'm an animator. And I'm good at managing, but they have to give me some animation to do for me to have some fun.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, see in the timeline, it sort of comes after the first Earthworm Jim game, the Jungle Book. But you're saying that the Earthworm Jim Jungle Book came in first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. In fact, I was working on Aladdin at Blue Sky, that previous job. Blue Sky had Aladdin before Virgin did, the company I came from.
Yes. And that's why you can see the hidden lamp in the map screen, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
The Aladdin lamp in the map screen.
Yep.
So one of my favorite Easter eggs.
It's switched out. Yeah, the teams were switched out. This was like the most. I came into video games in the most aggressive. It would be like Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates in the PC era. I walked in the middle of the peak Genesis and Super Nintendo explosion in San Diego, where, Sony was putting together a team. They were, huge companies and teams were blowing up all around me, and just salaries were going through the roof. You only had to have mediocre talent and you'd get hired. So I never thought I'd be a gamer, but I was an animator and there was so much work there. I could never get hired in animation, but I could easily get hired in games.
What memories do you have of the earlier version of Aladdin that still to this day people don't seem to really know much about before it got transferred over to this new team?
Yeah, it was in very early stages, but we had a character walking on screen, not a playable level yet. There were some basic walks and jumps, just figuring out the physics. The animation for the lead character was done by my friend Mark Dobratz, who later was the lead on all of the EA sports games up in Canada and Washington. He left all that to go into the ministry, but he was a very good friend of mine. I met him at American Film Technology, where we did Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So he was on that too, but he was the game lead on that. I remember there being, I think in the game design document, there were camel spiders because they thought it was funny that it was like desert, like a camel. but it was a kind of a spider, and and there were scorpions also, little scorpions. So it had almost nothing to do with the movie. What we were doing was just like, and it was very slow progress. And Pat Gilmore, who was the producer of that one, was very good friends with all of us, but he was like the head of Disney guy. And he knew what Virgin was doing with Jungle Book. And he's like, I'm seeing what Blue Sky is doing with Aladdin, and they're going to ruin this game. So that's also a weird time in the history of games, is that back then Blue Sky would be appropriate, just being this clunky little developer. They would be appropriate to take on a game as big as like Little Mermaid or Aladdin, and Disney would just kind of throw it to them because games just hadn't developed that far. Well, within 6 months, Dave Perry, Mike Dietz, Christian, I forgot the guy's name, Nick Brody, Steve Crow, Ed Schofield, those guys, they had turned the perception around of games, which started with Global Gladiators and Cool Spot, and then Aladdin, and then Jungle Book, that Disney just said, this is the new standard. It was within a couple months that technology, they didn't even think they could ever do that. And now it wasn't just the tech side of being able to fit animation on there, but it was a commitment and dedication to the fluidity and look of animation that was represented in the movie that they could actually pull off in a cartridge. It was unheard of.
Sure.
It was unheard of. And that's Mike Dietz on the animation side, Dave Perry, Andy Astor. They were doing all their little chopper tools and stuff to collapse stuff. It was all within like a 6 month to 1 year period.
Yeah, it was a very quick process, from what I understand. The Aladdin game that eventually did get released. Do you, from what I hear as well, the Aladdin game that wasn't released, that was actually the same engine that would eventually be in the Jurassic Park game that was released.
That's right.
And so would I be right in saying that the unreleased Aladdin game with the, as you say, the desert spiders and stuff, felt the same?
The same or worse. I mean, that was the problem with Blue Sky. I love those guys. I mean, they're incredible people, but they never got the gameplay correct on a game. Mm-hmm. It was just clunky.
I never completed Jurassic Park, if I'm going to be honest, back in the day.
Yeah, it was wooden. Physics weren't right. They were way more like math thinking, and not when we go to to Shiny and to Virgin, it was like intuitive, sexy, responsive. You know what I mean? It was just you didn't think about the controls as much in their games. Sure. They still had a ways to go, but I'm just saying Global Gladiators played in a way where the physics were good. And I thought they were like better than Mario, because Mario has a lot of slide to it. It's that, but you have to be able to give the player that kind of control and knowledge of simple physics to be able to demand more of them later when you're going to have to do a double jump or a run jump or an extra long jump that you have to hit by a pixel. You have to give them the expectation that what they're doing is tight and correct, and it has to be fluid and fun across 80 levels. And so the Blue Sky engine just wasn't that. It just didn't have enough game like physics wisdom to it. It's not about accuracy because Mario isn't accurate according to physics. It's something that your brain can learn and quickly intuit, so you don't think about the controls anymore.
Yeah. It works as a game.
Vanish.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember for me the Global Gladiators days and stuff like that. Again, Global Gladiators wasn't exactly a game I ever completed, but it is a game I very much enjoyed, and it was very much, a lot of those Shiny Day games were very much the entire package. It was the right amount of tood for that 90s era. You had the beautiful animation, and the music was such an enormous part as well. I still to this day use Global Gladiators and Aladdin music and Earthworm Jim music, the Tommy Tallarico years in my videos,
in fact,
all the time.
When I listened to Global Gladiators, I remembered, and Global Gladiators is probably my favorite thing that Tommy has done, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Yeah.
In a game. It had a funk, and there was something very creative about it that I had not heard in other games. So I'm just saying, and I remember smiling when he goes like, yeah,
Yeah, it had that party hip hop sort of sound, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a hip hop thing. I'm going, I haven't heard this pulled off in a cartridge before. These guys know what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've established yourself quite nicely now with the Shiny Guys, which leads to the biggest creation, definitely. Yeah. How did it all begin with Earthworm Jim?
That one was Virgin was falling apart within 6 months.
Okay.
Because the one team was the spine of Virgin, and Virgin was kind of set up as a little too typical of a company where they thought it was about their brand or Virgin or the sexiness and hotness of it. And really, you take Dave Perry, Nick Brody, Steve Crow, Mike Dietz, Ed Schofield out of a company, Tommy Tallarico, and you ain't got nothing left of a video game company. I don't care if you have 150 people there. There were 5 people that were irreplaceable if that kind of game is what you're trying to do. They even thought like, we can just take the old version of this engine and slap in a lion and you have Lion King. Didn't work. So they lost this asset and they went off and started Shiny, right? Which is what everyone did back then too. You work for a company, you grab your guys, the mates that make it all work, and you leave. Mm-hmm. And you start your own company. Because you're trying to push more royalties down to the team instead of going up to Richard Branson. You're pushing royalties down to the people who did the work. That flattening started happening in the 90s with smaller teams and independent teams creating companies and creating games. And all the slaves that were left at EA, they were happy to have a regular job, but they weren't getting the royalties or the credit.
Sure.
The idea of game designer, you'd never heard of these guys in other countries or on other teams. So the rock stars at Virgin left to start their own company, and they were looking at what projects they were going to do. A remote control helicopter project. They were looking at Beavis and Butthead game, and I was desperate to get out of Virgin. I was only there for 4 months on that game.
Any particular reason?
Just real conflict with the people there. I just didn't. The team never accepted me because I was an outsider. They all thought they should have been promoted, probably. And I came in, and I have a very aggressive way that I do things, which is I push really hard for just top tier excellence, and I don't care what people think of me. It's like, you're getting paid to make the world's greatest game, so let's make the world's greatest game. And there was a lot of difficult, I was just one of the difficult personalities on that game. It was a bad match. They moved me onto another project. I'm working with Mark Kelly on Cool Spot 3D for just a few weeks before I left. But the whole time I was trying to get in at Shiny because my best friend, Ed Schofield, who was one of the animators, and Mike Dietz was a good friend of mine, and Steve Crow went to my church. And, they were members of that team where I was on the inside going, hey, get me in, get me in, get me in. Well, at one point they decided to look at, because this is a rare opportunity, but again, unheard of at the point, to try an original character.
Sure.
Which no one had ever done before. If you think about it.
Yeah.
Global Gladiators was McDonald's, Cool Spot, these were products. Aladdin was product. They started when they were selling these little games on cassettes out of the back of their cars. Some of those were original ideas, usually a knockoff of another more popular game. But this time they said, we have the engine, we have the talent. Why are we going to do Beavis and Butthead? So
I take it nothing was ever created of these other projects. It was just ideas being thrown around.
Just ideas. They were still setting up office equipment.
Sure.
So they were just at the idea phase, and because Playmates Toys was a major funder of the company, they were able to show them the slate of Playmates toys that were coming. I think Knight Rider was one of their licenses, and I'm pretty sure Ninja Turtles was off the table, but they had Exo Warriors, kind of they just had a number of their projects, and it wasn't impressing some of the guys who have just a balls out, I don't give a shit personalities. And those guys are like Mike Dietz, who's just like, I don't want to do this. And Nick Brody is the other one. He's just like, this is bullocks. We ain't doing this. So I was working through Ed Schofield and Mike Dietz, and I go, what do I have to do to get in there? And Mike was like, Doug, we're looking for someone who can be creative. And they were looking at hiring Larry Ahern, who was really the animator behind the Day of the Tentacle series. And that was the guy that they wanted. But he didn't answer their calls, or he was like, oh, I'm going on vacation in Hawaii. And they needed to make a decision within a couple of days. So Mike said, why don't you bring in a character and prove to us that you're creative and that you can animate? Just do a walk cycle. So that was on a Friday. I went home on a Saturday and I created Earthworm Jim and about 75% of the characters in the game in 45 minutes on a Saturday.
Wow.
I did the animation on Sunday. I brought it into Mike on a Monday for my interview. And they made it sound like they hired me on the spot. I thought I had a job. They're like, yeah, this is good. But little did I know that behind the scenes, they were still making a longer decision, because Larry Ahern was still, they were like, we got to call him one last time. He didn't answer their calls. And then they had a group meeting. I didn't know this happened, but it was when I made that book, that The Making of Earthworm Jim. I interviewed Nick Brody and found out, and Mike Dietz, I found out this is what happened. They were going through all the licenses that they could do, right? Beavis and Butthead, Knight Rider. And they put in a slide of Earthworm Jim, which was the one that I pitched, right? And they said, or this guy. And Nick Brody said that he saw an image of Evil the Cat. And he said, whatever that guy is, that's what we're doing. And that was what convinced Dave Perry to go for it. That it was really Nick Brody had a bigger decision in it than I thought.
Oh, wow.
And so
okay.
That next day they called me and said, you're hired. They brought me in. They still weren't sure that they were going to do Earthworm Jim. They just said, you're the guy. Now we know that you're one of our animation team.
Yeah.
And then it just kept, I think they did probably a couple animations of Earthworm Jim and slammed it into the Shiny engine. And I think they said, yeah, that is what we're doing.
Wow. So yeah, it always seems to be, whenever you hear these stories about how characters were born, Mickey Mouse on a train on the way back, it was designed there in that one spot. Like the entire amount, 75% of the characters created in a day or two for the Earthworm Jim series.
It was easy. It was a fart. Like they were so easy to do that, because that is so just what I was into. That is my version of it's like They Might Be Giants type sci-fi. It's very much now. Once I had those characters, you bring in a guy named Professor Monkey for a head. There's only so much he's going to be, but there was so much contribution to who those characters are when they're in. Because if you're Nick Brody, I'd said, oh, this is evil. He lives in heck. That was all I said. Now, Nick went and created a level that's one of the greatest game levels I've ever seen on a Genesis, right?
Yeah.
I had no idea it would look like that. I had no idea. For instance, the most important thing about that level, I think, is atmosphere.
Yes.
I had no idea the atmosphere. Tommy comes in with music, and that's a discussion that he has with Nick Brody, is what sounds, what Nick did, those little black creatures, the bitey creatures.
Yep.
He, which by the way, I thought I had created until I interviewed Nick on the book.
Sure. Okay.
I don't know why. It was so arrogant of me. I just go, oh, he goes, no, I came up with those. I go, really? Ed Schofield came up with the snowman and animated the snowman in hell for the for
that,
the boss.
that's brilliant. That is.
So that's when that's when the contribution. Mike Dietz did most of the hero animation, which is Earthworm Jim. He would have me do idols and kind of some goofy, personality, the hand over hand stuff. But the major walk cycle was Mike, because to do the cycle that you would see the most in the game, he was by far the best animator, and Ed Schofield did the 360 shoot with the light, flash. So it became a team project. The day I walked in that door, it was no longer my thing, but it was and no one's idea would rule the day. Like, I could just say, I was never like, hey, I'm the creator of Earthworm Jim, so this is the way it's going to be. It was, everyone would come up with DP, Dave Perry. I never had a president of a company who walked in and he would come up with an idea and everyone just go, nah, that's terrible. And he'd be like, okay. It was not that way. People would come in with ideas, and no matter who came up with it, Steve Crow had a lot of contribution on Major Mucus because of that bungee thing, and came up with the little eye that came up. I don't know whose idea that was. It might have been Nick Brudi. I don't remember. Mike Dietz.
Who was the person that came up with Queen Slug for about?
Dave Perry came up with her name.
Do you remember the full name?
I drew her. I just said she was the queen. Queen pulsating, bloated, festering, something, malformed slug for a butt.
It goes, queen, pulsating, bloated, festering, sweaty, pus-filled, malformed slug for a butt.
There you go. There you go. I think Dave did slug for a butt. And then I think we all contributed some of those other names.
Sure.
It was just dumb. That's the other thing, was we weren't going like, we're so amazing. It was like, guys, what if the whole level was her butt? What if we called it Buttville? I mean, it's silly. It's just stupid. And we were having so much fun.
It's perfectly 90s, and it's it's become legendary because of that. I feel like, you don't have to go too far when you think back to that era that Earthworm Jim's going to come up.
Yeah,
and the characters.
And if you compare it to, this is the other thing, is that people think that like platformer games are easy. They're really hard, really tough genre. And you look at really bad and wooden games like Gex, Bubsy, Battletoads. I can name 1,000 wooden games that are just clunky as hell, very difficult to play. That just the gameplay side of Earthworm Jim, I think, is its strongest feature.
Mm-hmm.
It just happened to be combined with this character that just didn't belong anywhere, that made it unique. But the gameplay is amazing in Earthworm Jim.
I've completed them untold amount of times, those original two games, for sure. So I mean, you come up with these characters so quickly, but why? Where did the inspiration for those characters come from?
I've always made characters my whole life, so it's easy for me. So right. It's I create worlds. That's all I do, is characters, stories. It might have something to do with being, starting in Dungeons and Dragons, back in 1981, I think, where you create characters and create worlds. But all of my stuff always had a quirk and a funk to it. It was like oddball stuff. So I was raised on Gumby, so there's a lot of clay animation in my background. The Sesame Street Muppets, Warner Brothers cartoons.
Sure.
But especially the outrageous Tex Avery stuff. Because to me, cartoons are dumb as it is, but for a character's eyes to bulge out of their head is extra dumb and extra funny.
Sure.
It's like, it's a surprise. There's a shock to it. Oh, Yellow Submarine was a huge influence on me. The animated movie, because that came out when I was, probably 1970. I was 4 years old, and I remember seeing it on TV, and I just instantly, the dinosaurs and monsters in it, man, I was drawing all those weird creatures with the vacuum nose and stuff. You'll see a ton of the stuff show up in my stuff even now. Crazy Cat and Ignatz Mouse, that from the Hearst comics, one of the earliest comics. It influenced Bill Watterson. It's influenced Jeff Smith, who does Bone. It's a very early influence. It is one of the craziest comics that you could ever read. That had a huge influence on my character creation and world building. So there's always an absurdity to my stuff. The comedy, some Monty Python in there. I just loved comedy shows, you know? So it's humor, yet I also like sci-fi, you know, The Fly and E.T. And it was just kind of a big mosh of influences. I only know that it's easy to put it all together into a character. That's not the hard part. The hard part is kind of getting a video game company to do it, for starters.
Well, that's actually one of the questions that someone has put out here. Actually, one of my patrons, Dadaf, actually says, like, what advice do you have for struggling artists that actually want to make a name for themselves in this day and age?
Yeah. It's a lot easier now than it was then. I just, my heart kind of breaks for you, because I know that frustration. Mm-hmm. I know what it feels like to walk around with a portfolio under your arm and going, I have something to say. This is what I make, and no one will look at it. And I just need to get it to this company or this guy, and then my ideas will come out and I can give it to people. And there's so many things broken about that scenario that I get your frustration. So, but there's just millions of us that are that way. I think almost all of us are that way. Mm-hmm. Come up with an idea. I have something to say. When I did my YouTube channel, people are just emailing me links going, Doug, I have to show you this information. You're getting this too at this show, Daniel. You have to know this about Doug. They're like, they're passionate. How do I get this thing from in me to everyone? I'm going to use you, you know?
Yeah.
I'm going to use EA. So I'm only saying, I hear you on that. One thing that I've always thought was helpful is don't put your trajectory in someone else's hands. So as soon as you need a company or you need $1 million to pull off your idea, you're setting yourself up to failure. I would work within your means, so that if only you can independently grab a standalone platform engine and put your own ideas or animations into work with a friend, it's better to succeed that way, because you're 100% in control of its success, versus having one chain in that link where you're dependent on someone else, because then it has an infinite bigger chance of failing.
Sure. Fair enough. Well, there you go. I hope that answers that question there. So, okay, back to Earthworm Jim here. Obviously, you've established yourself there. We've got Earthworm Jim 1. You was working on Earthworm Jim 2 as well, and you had the Jungle Book before that. By this point, myself included, everyone seemed to know who Earthworm Jim was. He was in comic books. You had the TV show. Did you have much of input on that TV show?
Yeah, I was a producer, an exec producer. So I was there for all the scripts, script approval, casting approval. I did most of the character designs. If a character was to be designed that was new for the show, I would draw it and turn it over to the animation people. That's really what started my career in Hollywood. Was I was going up to work on Earthworm Jim, the cartoon. Mm-hmm. I was going from Orange County up to Hollywood, and I remember that was the first time that I needed to buy a cell phone, because I was on the road driving up in my crummy little truck. And so, I was very involved in the show, every episode.
That's excellent.
I was an actual working, it's where I learned a ton about producing animation. And really, I'd come from Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, a few years before, which was a Marvel animated show. So I kind of knew about exposure sheets, the recording, the animation process. I was working on all of that on my first job. So it was, but I became really good friends with the networks and, you know, with Universal and with Warner Brothers. So it's just, it is a whole other genre of project, animated series than a video game. So it's just, it's its own thing. So yeah, I got to make script notes, and it was great.
I remember someone here on Twitter, actually, the Out of Context Earthworm Jim Twitter page, which I'm sure you're fully aware of, put out there about the boss of Earthworm Jim 3D being Earthworm Kim from the show. Do you know about this, or did you have any? Was you one of the people that created Earthworm Kim?
I did the design for the wig. I mean, when I did the idols for him, one of the first ones we did was the giant beehive hairdo. So making it, but I didn't have any influence on Earthworm Jim 3D. That one was Shiny was already dead by then.
Yeah.
And another company was doing it, and it was just a money grab. Not by the company, but bought by the people, you know, funding it. So
do you have much of an opinion on that game?
I hated it. I saw the design document, and what's weird is I loved the guys working on it. I loved their art style. Mm-hmm. If it was another game, I wouldn't have a problem with it. It was not Earthworm Jim. And the sensibilities and the culture and the world, it was just, I'd look at it and go, that is not Jim.
Sure.
I was expecting the atmosphere and feel of working on it at Shiny. And this was clearly just a completely different, you know, it just retained the shape of Jim.
Yeah.
And,
I mean,
and really nothing else.
My sisters own that one. They may have completed it. I didn't get through more than a few levels, if I'm honest. And like you say, I've completed the original 2 endless amounts of times. It definitely didn't have the same feel as those. But do you have much to say on the unreleased game? So you had the PSP game that got quite close to completion, if I'm not mistaken, and there was a 2003 reboot that never came to be as well. Yeah.
So I was involved in both of those. The PSP was probably the closest. Mm-hmm. It was really just those failures were like normal video game failures, mm-hmm. where at the business level, a contract couldn't get signed between probably Interplay and a vendor or something. You know, that wasn't a team or any of us. We're way downstream from, you know, where the stocks are being traded. Right. Here. Okay. So those more fell apart at a contract or a big business level. It wasn't. So that was way over our head. We would just hear rumor. Hey, you want to work on this? Be like, yeah, let's go. And DP and I'd call each other. Are you in? Yeah, I'm in. And then just nothing had be gone. You know. Sure. Like, well, what happened to that? No, you know.
Do you have anything to like share on like what it was about, how it played, and you know, was you happy with how it felt when you played it compared to like the original 2?
There was I don't believe we ever fully got a playable level. I think on the PSP one got the closest.
Sure.
It might have had an engine running with a character on screen, but not a fully playable level yet at all. So it was close. It just, you know, it was one of those things that should have happened but didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should have but didn't. I don't recall any details about it, but
fair enough.
If it had anything to do with Shiny people, and I think Nick Broody might have been involved with it at some point. If it had anything to do with any of those guys, it would have worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw on there one of the bosses of the Earthworm Jim 2003 reboot was this big Rome-like level entirely made out of cheese, and the final boss was called Gorgonzola, which was this massive piece of cheese with an olive on his forehead. Not one of your creations?
I don't remember. It sounds like my sense of humor, at least. So that would be a lot closer than anything I saw in Earthworm Jim 3D. So whether if I created it or someone else did, I would approve that.
Fair enough. There you go.
I really don't remember.
And do you know of any other reboots that may not be out there that have not been talked about?
Well, we had always talked about doing the fat Earthworm Jim, where we were originally going to do that for the second game, just make him morbidly obese, like he was fat and like just watched TV all the time and got really huge. So that was going to be Earthworm Jim 2. And I remember DP coming and going, guys, we can't, you're not doing this. We're not doing this.
Because one thing I did notice when playing 2 from 1.
We were kind of teasing with it. It was like we were teasing ourselves and teasing each other. Just kept going down this road of Jim being morbidly obese.
Would he have got like fitter as the game gone on to a more classic style, or would he just been big all the way through?
Well, I think the problem was that the sprite would have taken so much more space just because of the acreage of how fat he was. He was just like this, like Mr. Creosote size, like this tiny head. And I don't even know, but it's just, it shows kind of how we worked. Is we were ready to go all the way with fat Jim. And it wasn't DP that stopped it. It was just kind of, we all go, yeah, okay, reality, we can't do that.
Fair enough.
but we were always, I think, interested in other versions of Jim. It was just, it's so expensive to make a game, so hard to make a game. When someone owns a character, say like Interplay or Shiny even, why is a company going to spend money on your IP when they can spend it on Sylvester and Tweety? On a well-known character? That's money that goes into IP, and they're trying to make everything, big or whatever. I don't understand. So that's why it always amazed me, where I always thought Rayman was a crap character, but amazing games.
Yeah, they are good games.
How that team can keep making those games, even though the character has no push to make him great, because he's not great. But then you see these games they come out with, and man, Origins and stuff. Probably one of the greatest platform games I've ever seen.
It's fantastic.
I think they're near miraculous. It was stuff I'd never seen before.
I take it that's what you'd want to see for the future of your.
That's one of the few teams I would ever say I'd feel confident if they took on Earthworm Jim.
Besides the Amico team.
Oh, well, the Amico team's the Shiny team. So,
sure, okay.
It's Nick Broody and those guys. So I'm like, hey, whatever. Everyone's like, oh, we doubt the Amico and we doubt. I'm all, no, guys, you don't understand. These guys, they know games. They're not going to put out crap.
I've got the Amico on order, and I've got to say that, an exclusive Earthworm Jim game, that's a major puzzle piece into me actually wanting to pre-order that system. For sure.
And it can still fail the same way that any game can fail. It's not like it's just automatically a win. But they're innovators, and they're wise, and they're aggressive, and they're workaholics. And, so it's going to be the best effort that anyone could do. And in a way, I think the problem is, there's a problem with fandoms, is they don't like change, right? You want me to take you back to you feeling like you were 5 years old.
Yeah, sure.
Is what you demand. And that goes for, I listen to Beatles, and everyone's like, why doesn't Paul McCartney just write Yesterday, all over again? And here he's this adult, he's like, look, I want to craft in this other direction. I want to create. Fleetwood Mac makes a new album. No one cares. No one cares.
Just kind of put rumors back on.
Make me feel like I did back then. You make me feel like I did back then. And so I get where fandoms come from, but that's not often where creators and innovators live.
Yeah. Do you know how the progress is going?
I don't.
No. Fair enough. That's cool.
I'm friends with all those guys, but the last thing I talk about is business with them. I'm always like, we're talking about, laughing about everything.
Yeah, that's fine.
We do, but I haven't. And I'm sure that what's going on with the game is still probably too early to show anything. So when they get something together that is working, they'll show it to me.
Yeah, there was a very, very short teaser using a lot of the voice samples from the original games that went up of just Earthworm Jim just running up and down on the beach.
Yeah,
and you see.
I saw that.
How do you feel about that animation for Earthworm Jim?
I loved it. That's Mike Dietz. Yeah, he sent me that. So he showed me it before they went out with it. But that was, I mean, that's not a real game. That's not a
No.
playable level. So it, to me, anything that isn't a playable level is not reflective of what the game's going to be.
Sure. And what we'll go for one more Earthworm Jim before we just take over completely this entire interview and being nothing but Earthworm Jim. But
yeah.
I know there's a lot of talks in the past of a movie happening.
Yep.
Anything to add there, or anything that has happened there?
That is done between me and the Interplay people. No, there's been close calls with the Sonic team, but then I was taking a trip to Japan, and then with that animation team that did the movie, and then COVID hit, and I couldn't go, and it just all fell apart.
So is that still up in the air, or is it canned?
Still up in the air, and there have been probably 3 attempts outside of me where Interplay went with some screenwriter friends of mine. They had a pitch that was going pretty well. They had a script. It fell apart. They had to move. Different people have been interested. So a lot of people have shown interest.
Do you remember those scripts?
I don't.
No.
I don't.
Rough idea what happens.
In fact, I had written a script that I had submitted to them saying this is the movie. And then when I got the book rights to make my own Earthworm Jim graphic novel, I went back to that script and said, this is what the book's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the script and just went, nah, that's not what the book's going to be. After I read it again, I'd written it like 10 years earlier.
Right.
And so I took this whole new direction, but that's part of my pitch with the book is I go, this would make a great movie.
It's going to sound like a sales pitch for me right now, but I have, let me get it here so people can see on the screen. I've got the Earthworm Jim, the first one that launched the cow right here. There it is. And so this was a crowdfunded project by you. Yeah. I don't know how much you look at my channel, but I talk a lot about crowdfunding on my channel.
No,
more on
the
negative side of stuff. But how did you find crowdfunding this? And you've got your second one as well. You've done the Bigfoot Bill crowdfunders. Yeah. And I believe you also had the game as well. Armacrog?
Armacrog, yeah.
Yeah. How have you found your history with crowdfunding to be?
I absolutely love it. Mm-hmm. Again, you're the independent guy that had talked earlier in the Discord said, it's an excellent way for a creator to put together one playable level and launch it to an independent crowd and try and get it funded.
Yeah.
I did my first Kickstarter was 2010 or 11. I think I did one of my sketchbooks and raised $85,000 to do a leather bound edition of my sketchbooks. There's the very first Earthworm Jim drawing is in there.
Wow.
And so as an indie guy, that Earthworm Jim book, we raised $815,000. The second book I raised $500,000. So it was a little less, but it's fun. It's weird having a publishing company. And look at that book.
I tell you what, I don't have the biggest collection of graphic novels, but the amount of love, the story's good too.
Yeah.
But the quality of the book itself is utterly fantastic. I don't own another graphic novel that looks
book. That's a $25 book, Dan. You cannot get that for $25. It's got embossing, debossing, foil. That is the highest quality paper I could get.
Yeah.
It's colored by Catherine Garner,
mm-hmm.
who is
Rocket Worm.
Yeah, Rocket Worm, who's a big super fan girl, and it was like a dream come true, where I got to use her as a colorist because,
and for her, I'm sure as well.
Yeah, it's funny too because at the end of a graphic novel, it's always terrible. You're done with it, and she's like, I never want to paint Earthworm Jim again, and I never thought I'd say that. It was great. Well, and she did the sequel, so she did do it again.
Yeah, she did. Have you got a third one coming?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm all for crowdfunding. It's a different business. It's yet another discipline to get into. Printing quality, budget, schedule, managing inventory, shipping and fulfillment. All of that. You have to become an expert suddenly at publishing. And so by now I have it because I've done Earthworm Jim 1 and 2, Bigfoot Bill 1 and 2. Those are all the big hardbound, plus the making of
Earthworm
Jim. I've done a lot. The profit margin isn't that big, so it's not like I'm making. When people say like, "Oh, he raised $815,000," guys, almost all of it is going into the book. I'll make my money selling the overprint if I overprint by 2,000 books, and if I can just eke out just enough money to pay the rent, I'm happy. But in the meanwhile, all the fans get this insane, over the top book that I think pays great tribute to the fans of Earthworm Jim, is what I'm trying to do. It's my thank you note.
That's cool. Yeah. Like I say, I think the original book is that book right there is it's insane quality. I definitely don't own any other graphic novels that have cost me more. Look, the print quality and everything on it is really nice, and I love the bossing around there as well. It's really good. So yes, as you say, we'll move on from Earthworm Jim a bit more now. I'm sure you get bored of the amount of people asking you Earthworm Jim questions all the time in every single interview.
Well, it is kind of how I'm known, so yeah, it's only fair.
Yeah, that's sure. So you've moved on from Shiny at this point. You've now moved over to Neverhood to work on the Neverhood. What was that transition like, and why did it happen?
It was very difficult at the time because the Shiny team, we were so close. But there was, I think, Shiny with Nick Broody and Dave Perry was always more aiming toward more and more technology in 3D.
You definitely saw that of MDK.
Yeah, and Wild Nines. I mean, you see it just launch into that direction. And Nick Broody, he was always more like James Cameron, like the hardcore action stuff. And we were like dinglings, So a lot of those guys came into the Neverhood. So Steve Crow came over, who did New Junk City. Mike Dietz, the lead animator, Ed Schofield, the animator, Mark Lorenzen, who did Lorenzo's Soil, came over. So it was really those, probably half of Shiny came over to the Neverhood. It was really just, I had an opportunity because I created Earthworm Jim, where Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg were starting a new company called DreamWorks. And they go, we want to do interactive games, because Spielberg was a huge video game fan. And Katzenberg had tried buying Earthworm Jim a number of times, and they wouldn't do it. He was trying to buy it into Disney. So when he launched DreamWorks, he goes, hey, you want to come do video games for us? I go, yep. And they said, why don't you come pitch an idea to us? and it was the exact same thing as what I did for Shiny. Was I had to create a character and bring it in. So I did this clay. Like I said, Gumby was a huge influence on me, and Yellow Submarine. If you combine Gumby and Yellow Submarine, you get the Neverhood.
Right.
So I and Crazy Cat, in Ignat's Mouse. The tree designs were literally straight out of Crazy Cat. So I brought this pitch in, and I pitched it at Steven Spielberg's house. Wow. And Mike Dietz was there with me, and we had like this one clay sculpt of the character, and we pitched the game. And Spielberg said, yeah, and they gave us a 3-game deal. And fully funded company. That's what people did. You'd walk out and start a company. Johnny did it. I did it. Hundreds of people did it. And because if you have the talent, they're not, a video game company needs cartridges to come out, like hundreds of them. They couldn't get enough teams to make them. And so that was that market created the demand for way more independent teams than existed.
For sure. So, I mean, obviously you went off, made Neverhood, and that was actually the Neverhood studio that created those particular games. Do you have any particular interesting memories of that, of creating that game? Anything that stands out?
It was the greatest time of my life, man. It was a dream project. That was like my art, my paintings put into a clay point and click world. And, the animation we were doing was just insane. Like no one had seen that kind of puppet animation done in games before. Claymation. We bought 3 tons of clay to build the world. We're building like physical stuff. We're out in a warehouse, like drilling sets together and melting clay and covering everything in clay.
Yeah, I've seen a few of the making of pictures. It looks insane.
It was a bizarre, and we did that whole game in a year.
Yeah.
And it was just a great time. It wasn't a huge financial success at all. And
No.
Bill Gates was one of the partners too, on the game. So that's what DreamWorks Interactive was. It was the DreamWorks guys with Bill Gates. So there's a lot of Microsoft influence in there too on the finances side. But we were cut free to do anything we wanted.
I know Larry Bundy on Twitter actually was wondering why it didn't get released in Western territories on the PlayStation, and why it only was a Japanese exclusive. Do you have any thought behind that?
Because
or why?
It was only a Japanese company that was interested in, because PC gaming wasn't that big in Japan at the time, but the Sony PlayStation was. So I said, we want to do a full port. So they did a full translation, full port in Japan. And I ended up becoming partners with some of these Japanese businessmen. They've been my partners for, 20 years now. And in fact, now they want to bring that Earthworm Jim book that I did and do a Japanese version of it and release it hardbound over there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
So I've been working with these guys. I became best friends with them, but there's like this Japanese company. I went over there like on 5 trips. I opened up a coffee shop over there with one of them.
Okay.
And it just became an explosion of like ideas and kind of just a weird, I just fell in love with Japan, going over there. I absolutely had a blast.
I've got to look this up. What's the name of the coffee shop?
Well, that one was called the Goody Bear Coffee Shop.
Okay.
It didn't last long. But
okay.
It was, I went in and did all the murals, and it was a blast.
I'll have to look this up. That'd be interesting.
I loved it. It was, so anyways, there was no interest in putting a point and click clay animated adventure on the Sony PlayStation here. All Sony wanted and EA wanted was 3D, show off the number of polys. They would never go for it here.
That's
Japan
a shame.
was always way more innovative on their games than they were. Over here is like, how much John Madden and how many Call of Duty ripoffs can we do?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is definitely the case.
And it's why I'm thankful for companies like Insomniac that were doing, and Crash Bandicoot. Those guys, they were all the Naughty Dog. Were the same. Insomniac came out of Naughty Dog at the time, so doing Crash Bandicoot, super creative. I think right in the realm of what we were working on. Jack and Daxter. I know the guy that created Jack and Daxter. He worked on the Neverhood. In fact, he was one of our clay sculptors. Was Greg Baldwin. Mm-hmm. He also worked on what's the Indiana Jones type one that those guys do?
Uncharted.
He worked on that in the Spider-Man game, and then our little grunt producer, ended up creating Diablo 3. So it's like all these kids, the skaters that were like our in-betweeners and goof around guys worked on were some of the leadership on like Red Dead Redemption. It was weird because back then any kid could get involved in games. And if you were in the game industry for 3 years, you were like a veteran and you were ready to go off and you were like the leadership on the next game.
There you go. And let's chat about Armacrog then. Your work on Armacrog. Obviously, that was a successful Kickstarter, and it actually eventually ended up coming out, which is good. Which meant it didn't come up on any of my shows.
It barely got completed. That was a tough project. We raised $975,000. I wasn't involved in the business side of that one at all. That was Mike Dietz and Ed, so the 2 animators on Earthworm Jim and the Neverhood. We were the 3 lead animators on both those projects. We go, let's do a crowdfunded kind of Neverhood tribute, point and click adventure, and it wasn't enough money.
No.
And our programming side fell apart a number of times. So that was the problem. And I don't know what went wrong because I'm not a tech guy at all. But when we launched, by the time it was late, Ed and Mike were taking like second mortgages out on their house to pay to finish that thing. So they were just way over their skis, in trouble. Financially, it was a disaster. And then gameplay wise, just the game never got tight. There were crash bugs in the game still.
Right.
And, it was just tough to see it not quite come together. So I did all the paper design and sculpts, of some of the characters as far as what the worlds would look like. And then after that, I was done, and they were still working on it for a year, just executing on everything and trying to make stuff work. It was a disaster.
Was you happy with how it turned out?
I mean, happy enough. It's a wonderful world. It's a wonderful game. It's just never quite gelled. You're looking for that apex, over the top tightness, a sign of quality, and it never had the ability to be that.
No, not with the funding that it got.
Not with the funding, no, because you really have to have a team of programmers just hitting bug fixes all day, all night, just tons of it. And we just never had that. You had like one programmer in another country, you're running crash bugs out to him. All the sound was just a disaster. And the sound quality, actually, the actual program side of it, it was almost like a Neverhood game that needed twice the size of a team.
Yeah. I can imagine that.
It was so just from that end. So everything that we had control of, it was great. The animation was beautiful. The world, it was just fun story. There was stuff about it that was working. The music was great, but just the hard part of games, which is kind of the architecture, the engine, the bug testing, the actual nuts and bolts difficult part of a game that keeps it from crashing, or it launched and didn't work it would just crash on the Mac, and you go like, well, how fast can we turn around a bug fix? With one programmer, it's 3 months.
Sure.
And by then, all your backers are like going, this is shite, why did I fund this? This is a ripoff. I'm like, look, we're working on it.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And in that sense, then I'll end it with here. Obviously, you said that you want to be doing a number 3 of the book, of the Earthworm Jim book.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're going down the crowdfunding route again with that.
Yep.
Yeah. What are your impressions on this new crowdfunding comic book explosion that's happened? It seems to be that this is the best way of getting discovered, in a sense. I've definitely discovered entirely new comic books through crowdfunding.
Yeah, it's the way to do it now. It's just another form of indie. I'm independent artist, so anything that keeps an artist independent, where some money guy isn't dictating your material, is what every artist should be striving for. Is you want to try, and it's better to get an independent angel investor, like one person with $1 million. Well, crowdfunding is 1 million people with $1 million,
Mm-hmm.
So it keeps you independent. That is the strength of crowdfunding or any other form of independent funding. And if you don't need funding for your comic, by all means, do a free web comic, or build it up on your audience on Patreon and Twitter. And then the money will come later. But this is the way it should be done, I think, for comics. They should be independent. And because it doesn't cost as much to make a comic as a video game. Video games are insane. Comic book, I can do a comic book by myself in 6 months. I can do 160 pages and then sell the movie rights for $500,000. I'm saying I'll get my money later, or sometimes never. Sometimes you don't get a dime, and it's still the greatest book you've ever done, but you did it by yourself, and you can do a comic by yourself. So I'm a big fan of crowdfunding comics as a genre. It's important, super important to plug in. And there's also a democracy about it, because if you suck or you're not good at building a crowd, then there's not an audience there to float you, But the audience, it's about you being a very direct businessman with the exact people that are into your work, that are reading your work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different model than the old one, which is, I have all this money and I will pay you to create. It is, you're going to go out with your own feet and build up a Instagram following, which every artist should be doing. You should be Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, or I don't care where you get your audience. It really doesn't matter. Get on TikTok, wherever the eyes are. Put your work out every day. If you're not putting it out every day, you're not ready to be a comic book artist, because you should be drawing on your comic every day, and you should be putting the material out to build a crowd, so that when you crowdfund, it's 5,000 people showing up instead of 50.
There you go. There you go. Words of advice. I think that's a great way to end it there. Obviously, yeah, like I say, we do a lot of crowdfunding talk on the show. So as Doug just said there, I mean, in my early days of being a YouTuber, I pushed so heavy on all of those social medias and factoids and everything else. And it does lead to an audience. So I think that's brilliant advice. Do you have any rough idea when book number 3 will be dropping, or you at least be announcing?
It's a ways away, because I have to do book 3 of Bigfoot Bill first.
Okay.
So, and there might even be another book before that I might release an old book of Earthboy Jacobus that I did before. So Earthworm Jim at the earliest mid next year. Okay. Well, that's cool. I'm sure we'll be talking about that anyway on Kickstarter News, as we have in the past. Yeah, I love I appreciate the coverage, Daniel. I love your show, and I love just what you've done in it. I can just tell when I watch you, I just go, you get the work, you get what's going on in crowdfunding. It is its own weird, unique culture. So it's great to have a commentary on the whole culture of it all. Yeah,
well, we've had a flip around now, but the reason I have to do the Kickstarter News is because people seem to think that I hate crowdfunding, because obviously I talk about so many negative crowdfunding projects out there, of which there are. Every time I think I've run out, I go and just do a quick Google search, and I'm just, okay, I've got the next 15 videos
and
sorted.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Hit them hard.
Yeah.
Because they're ruining the genre. They've already practically ruined it for games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Games is hard.
So many games are just falling apart at the crowdfunding level. It's because we're not always, just because we're good at raising money doesn't mean they're great at hitting deadlines and putting value in there. Some people see crowdfunding as just like free money.
Unfortunately so. The technology is already a very tarnished area. Board games is slowly catching up, which is a real shame. I'm a bit of a big board game Kickstarter collector. I do like collecting those.
Gloomhaven is one of the greatest games I've ever played.
For me, it's a game called Saloon Tycoon. I was really impressed with what they did with that. Okay. That's a cool one. But like I say, I have to try and talk about some of the good as well, because there is plenty of good on crowdfunding websites. So, I really appreciate you coming on and having a chat with us today. And thanks to all of the Patreons and YouTube members that are watching in live. And thank you, everyone that is watching this now that it's gone on. Cheers, Doug. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you all, my friends.